Andrea Harrison was much cooler in the comics. Some characters in The Walking Dead were portrayed pretty implausibly, but if I had to pick one character that was the lamest in the show compared to the comics, it would definitely be Andrea. In the comics, she was Michonne 2.0, basically, while in the show, she had way too much screen time and was so damn annoying. So let's first summarize who Andrea's character was in the show. Andrea was born in 1974, 12 years before her sister. Because of their different personalities, their parents had different approaches to raising them. Andrea went to college to study law and remained distant from her family, often missing Amy's birthday parties. One time, Andrea and Amy went on a road trip and her father gave Andrea a gun for protection, which she has guarded ever since, because somewhere around that time the apocalypse started. During the outbreak of the apocalypse, she and Amy met Dale Horvath. They soon found a small group of survivors near Atlanta. Eventually the camp was overrun and they had to move on. Soon they settled down for a while on a farm owned by Herschel. Andrea is also starting to like Shane. Honestly, it would have been pretty cool if they left the group together and went off on their own, but yeah, they both got killed off. The farm also gets overrun and Andrea gets separated from the group. She meets Michonne and they spend a few months together. They soon learn of a place called Woodbury and are taken there because they are in a pretty bad state. Michonne doesn't want to stay there and argues that there is something wrong with the place, but Andrea wants to stay. Eventually, the governor finds out that there is a group of people living in the prison. Michonne goes to the prison and tells Rick's group about the governor. The governor is a pretty bad guy and Andrea slowly begins to realize that. Rick tells Andrea that the governor is a crazy psychopath, but Andrea doesn't believe him and wants to resolve the conflict between Woodbury and the prison. Andrea goes back to Woodbury and the governor is pretty pissed that she left, but he lets it slip. Andrea wants to go back to the prison, but the governor finds her and takes her back to the torture room or something. The governor kills Milton and leaves him to turn. He bites Andrea before she can get free and Rick's group finally attacks Woodbury and finds Andrea dying and she kills herself. Sorry for the long recap, but you had to listen to the whole thing so you can see how lame it is. I'm not saying this is an interesting character development, but it would be so much cooler if Andrea lived like she did in the comics. You see, in the comics, Andrea's story was just better. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, consider smashing that subscribe button. Not much is known about Andrea's life before or at the beginning of the outbreak in the comics, except that she was born in 1978 and had a younger sister, Amy. Bear in mind that Andrea was born in 1974 in the show and 1978 in the comics, but they aren't anywhere near the same age. The apocalypse in the series takes place in 2010, while the apocalypse in the comics begins in 2003. This makes Andrea 36 years old at the beginning of the series and 25 in the comics. The beginning is more or less the same. Andrea meets up with Dale and they find a group outside of Atlanta. Shane thinks that they should stay there, while Rick thinks that they should move on because it's not safe. Shane kind of loses his mind and tries to kill Rick, but Carl takes him down. With Shane gone, they hit the road and soon arrive at Herschel's farm. The farm isn't overrun. Herschel just wants the group to leave, so they head off again. The farm isn't overrun, so Andrea doesn't get separated from the group, and also the governor is a crazy person in the comics, so Andrea isn't a big fan of it. They find the prison, and after a while Herschel and his family also go to the prison because it's safer there. Michonne just shows up outside the prison one day and they let her in. Michonne, Rick and Glenn soon find Woodbury and the governor just rips Rick's arm off and rapes Michonne like it's every other Tuesday. They get away, of course. Also, the whole time that they were out, Andrea was in the prison keeping watch. Daryl doesn't exist in the comics, so she was kind of in charge alongside Therese, I guess. Oh, and I should also mention that there is no Sasha in the comics either, so Andrea is the one who can shoot really well. The whole war begins between Woodbury and the prison, and Andrea takes out a bunch of enemies, probably more than anyone else. She also gets a scar from a bullet. Dale also loses his leg because a walker bit him. If it isn't obvious, Dale and Andrea are together in the comics. They were together in the show too, but not like this. The governor eventually wins somehow and gets the prison, but destroys the gates and gets shot by one of his own people because no one likes him. Everyone gathers at Herschel's farm except Lori and Herschel and stuff like that. They hit the road again. Soon a group of cannibals kidnap Dale and eat his other leg. He's also been bitten, so they've eaten tainted meat. Basically the same as Bob in the series.
David me! Shut up.
The group finds the cannibals and kills them all. Dale then dies and it's really sad, especially for Andrea. They find Alexandria and all the fighting with the Savers begins. Rick and Andrea also get together. This sounds weird, but it's really great. It works better than Michonne and Rick in the show, and it's pretty sweet. I could go into details, but basically Andrea is a badass who helps Rick take down the Savers. She's like Michonne, only better. They end up defeating Negan, and there is a big time jump. Carl calls Andrea mom now, and stuff like that happen. Also, Andrea gets a really badass hat. When the Whisper War starts, she was constantly in the front lines. When the Alpha Horde arrived to Alexandria, Andrea was immediately making a plan. She and a few other people made a plan to drive the Horde away, and they led them to the ocean, a few hundred at a time. At one point, Eugene falls off his horse and Andrea tries to save him. It's very risky and the Horde around them is gigantic. Thanks to Andrea's help, Eugene manages to get back on his horse and escapes. Unfortunately, Andrea is bitten and it takes days for her to die, and she has the opportunity to say goodbye to everyone. Everyone says goodbye to her, and Rick tells her that he loves her more than he ever loved Lori. Sorry, Lori. She finally turns and Rick has to put her down, but he can't. She almost bites him, but eventually Rick puts her down. That moment was just so sad. Rick then sleeps on her grave for a couple months. I guess that says it all. This moment was probably the saddest moment in the whole comics. It was so sad that Robert Kirkman himself had to write a pretty long message at the end of the issue 167, saying how much he likes Andrea and that he feels like he's killing part of himself, but he still had to do it. So yeah, there's a pretty big difference between the series version and the comic book version. That's what Andrea could become in the series. It's kind of sad how they wrote her. In the comics, she died as a hero, while in the series, she killed herself. I guess she was bitten in both cases, but still, it's not a secret that Andrea is pretty hated in the series. She was pretty annoying and suicidal. In the comics, she was a hero. She was almost at the top of Alexandria. Rick let her decide almost everything and trusted her. I think Andrea dying early makes it a little more realistic, because in the comics Andrea just didn't die no matter what you throw at her. But in the comics there are still a lot of unpredictable deaths and Andrea was more or less the main character. I really missed Andrea in the show. The series Andrea is just something completely different. Okay, maybe I'm being rude, but Andrea in the comics was just better. She was a badass female character. There are some female characters like Michonne and Rosita in the show, but Andrea was just something different. She was just something special. It's hard to describe. Anyways guys, this is why Andrea was better in the comics. She was basically a fearless hero. It sucks that Andrea was so annoying in the series. I have no idea why she was written that way, but yeah, too bad.